After you finish listening to the story, don't forget to leave a comment about what you would have done in the character's place. Now, let's dive into the story. Peter had always trusted Olivia. Their marriage, though not perfect, had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty, or so he thought. They'd been together for 8 years, married for 5, and while the spark of their early days had faded into the comfortable rhythm of routine, Peter had never doubted her loyalty. Olivia was his partner, his confidant, the person he trusted most in the world. But that trust was about to be shattered. It started on a quiet Tuesday evening. Peter had come home late from work, exhausted after a long day of meetings. Olivia was already in bed, her phone charging on the nightstand. Peter sat down on the edge of the bed, glancing at the screen. A notification popped up, a message from someone named Alex. Peter frowned. He didn't recognize the name. Olivia had never mentioned an Alex before. Curiosity got the better of him. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the notification. He knew he shouldn't. Snooping through his wife's phone was a violation of her privacy, a line he'd never crossed before. But something about that name, Alex, felt off. He unlocked the phone and opened the messages. What he saw made his blood run cold. The messages were intimate, filled with inside jokes and pet names. Alex called Olivia babe and sweetheart, and she responded in kind. They talked about meeting up, about how much they missed each other, about how they couldn't wait to be together again. Peter's hands trembled as he scrolled through the conversation, his heart pounding in his chest. One message stood out: "I can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing, Liv. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Peter felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He dropped the phone onto the bed, his mind racing. How long had this been going on? Who was Alex? And how could Olivia do this to him? He spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, too angry and hurt to sleep. When Olivia woke up the next morning, she found him sitting on the couch, her phone in his hand. "Peter," she asked, her voice groggy with sleep. "What's going on?" Peter held up the phone, his expression hard. "Who's Alex?" Olivia froze. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. "Peter, I can explain." "Explain what?" Peter snapped, his voice rising. "That you've been cheating on me. That you've been lying to me this whole time." Olivia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Don't," Peter interrupted. "Don't try to spin this. I read the messages, Olivia. I know what's going on." Olivia sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, Peter. I never meant for this to happen." Peter laughed bitterly. "You never meant for this to happen? What does that even mean? Did you accidentally fall into bed with someone else?" Olivia wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "It just happened. Alex and we've been working together on a project and things got complicated." "Complicated?" Peter repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're married, Olivia. What part of that is complicated?" Olivia didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, while Peter stared at her, waiting for an explanation that never came. The next few days were a blur of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. Peter moved out of the apartment, staying with a friend while he tried to figure out what to do. He couldn't look at Olivia without feeling a surge of rage and betrayal. He couldn't believe that the woman he'd loved and trusted had done this to him. But as the days passed, his anger began to give way to something else: curiosity. Who was Alex? What kind of person could make Olivia risk everything they'd built together? Peter knew he shouldn't care, but he couldn't help himself. He needed to know. One evening, Peter decided to confront Alex. He found the man's contact information in Olivia's phone and sent him a message asking to meet. To his surprise, Alex agreed. They met at a coffee shop downtown. Alex was tall and handsome, with the kind of confidence that made Peter feel small in comparison. He looked surprised to see Peter standing there, but he quickly recovered, his expression shifting to one of polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" Alex asked. "I'm Peter," Peter said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Olivia's husband?" Alex's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. But then he nodded, gesturing for Peter to sit down. "I think we should talk." The conversation that followed was tense and awkward. Alex admitted that he'd known Olivia was married but claimed he hadn't intended for things to go as far as they did. He apologized, though his words felt hollow to Peter. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Alex said. "It just happened." Peter shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to act like this was some accident. You knew what you were doing." Alex didn't argue. He just sat there, looking uncomfortable, as Peter vented his frustration. By the time Peter left, he didn't feel any better. If anything, he felt worse. Seeing Alex, hearing his excuses, only made the betrayal feel more real. When Peter returned home, Olivia was waiting for him. She looked nervous, like she knew where he'd been. "Did you see him?" she asked quietly. Peter nodded. "Yeah. I saw him." Olivia swallowed hard. "And?" Peter didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at her, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know if I can do this, Olivia. I don't know if I can get past this." Olivia's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. I hope you know how sorry I am. And how much I love you." Peter didn't respond. He just turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. Peter didn't go back to the apartment that night. Instead, he checked into a hotel, needing space to think. The confrontation with Alex had left him more unsettled than before. He had expected to feel some sense of closure, but instead, he felt emptier than ever. The betrayal was still raw, and the image of Olivia with Alex haunted him. The next morning, Peter woke up to a barrage of messages from Olivia. She was pleading with him to talk, to give her a chance to explain. He ignored them, turning off his phone and focusing on the day ahead. He had work to do, and he couldn't afford to let his personal life derail his career. But as the day went on, Peter found it impossible to concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to Olivia, to the life they'd built together, and to the lies that had torn it all apart. By the time he left the office, he was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. That evening, Peter decided to visit his older brother, Mark. Mark had always been the voice of reason in their family, the one who could see through the chaos and offer practical advice. When Peter arrived at Mark's house, he found him in the garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle. "Hey," Mark said, looking up as Peter walked in. "You look like hell." Peter managed a weak smile. "Yeah. I've had better weeks." Mark wiped his hands on a rag and gestured for Peter to sit down. "What's going on?" Peter hesitated, then told him everything, about the messages, about Olivia's affair, about his confrontation with Alex. Mark listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When Peter finished, Mark let out a low whistle. "Damn, Pete. That's rough." "What do I do?" Peter asked, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can forgive her, but I don't know if I can walk away either." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your marriage, your decision. But I will say this, forgiveness is hard, but so is walking away. Either way, it's going to hurt. You just have to decide which pain you can live with. Peter nodded, his brother's words sinking in. He knew Mark was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. The next few days were a blur of soul-searching and sleepless nights. Peter avoided Olivia, ignoring her calls and messages. He needed time to think, to figure out what he wanted. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't just let go of the life they'd built together. He still loved Olivia, despite everything. Finally, he decided to meet with her. He texted her, asking her to come to their favorite park. It was a place they'd gone to often in the early days of their relationship, a place filled with happy memories. When Olivia arrived, she looked nervous. She sat down on the bench beside Peter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. Peter nodded, his expression unreadable. "I need to know why, Olivia. Why did you do it?" Olivia took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know, Peter. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. I was lonely, and Alex. He made me feel special. It was stupid and selfish, and I regret it every day." Peter looked at her, searching her face for some sign of sincerity. And he saw it, the guilt, the regret, the desperation to fix what she'd broken. But he also saw something else, the shadow of Alex, the man who had come between them. "Do you love him?" Peter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia shook her head vehemently. "No. I love you, Peter. I always have. What I did with Alex. It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake." Peter didn't respond right away. He just sat there, staring at the ground, trying to process everything. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Olivia. But I'm willing to try." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" Peter nodded. "But it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to earn my trust back. And that's going to take time." Olivia reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'll do whatever it takes, Peter. I promise." The decision to try to rebuild their marriage wasn't an easy one, and the road ahead was far from smooth. Peter and Olivia agreed to attend couples therapy, hoping it would help them navigate the wreckage of their relationship. The sessions were emotionally draining, filled with painful revelations and uncomfortable truths. But through it all, they kept trying. Olivia was remorseful, that much was clear. She answered Peter's questions honestly, even when the answers hurt. She cut off all contact with Alex and did everything she could to regain Peter's trust. She was patient, understanding that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Peter, for his part, worked on letting go of his anger. It wasn't easy. There were nights when he lay awake, replaying the betrayal in his mind, wondering if he was making a mistake by staying. But he reminded himself of the love they'd shared, the life they'd built together, and the promise they'd made to fight for their marriage. One evening, several months after their reconciliation began, Peter came home to find Olivia waiting for him in the living room. The apartment was filled with the smell of her homemade lasagna, his favorite dish. She'd set the table with candles, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. "What's all this?" Peter asked, smiling despite himself. "I just wanted to do something special," Olivia said, her voice soft. "To remind you how much you mean to me." Peter felt a lump form in his throat. He sat down at the table and they ate together, talking and laughing like they used to. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they were truly connecting. After dinner, Olivia handed Peter a small box. He opened it to find a simple silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Always and Forever." "I know it's not much," Olivia said, her eyes glistening with tears. But I wanted to give you something to remind you of my commitment. I'm not perfect, Peter, but I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. Peter slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, feeling the weight of her words. He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm here too, he said. And I'm not going anywhere either. As the months turned into years, Peter and Olivia's marriage grew stronger. They learned to navigate their new normal, to lean on each other during the hard times and celebrate the good ones. They traveled together, took up new hobbies, and even adopted a dog, a scruffy little terrier named Max, who quickly became the center of their world. But the scars of the past never fully faded. There were still moments when Peter felt a pang of doubt, when the memory of Olivia's betrayal crept into his mind. And there were times when Olivia felt overwhelmed by guilt, wondering if she'd ever truly deserve Peter's forgiveness. Yet, through it all, they held on to each other. They reminded themselves that love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing each other, day after day, even when it's hard. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset, Peter turned to Olivia. Do you ever think about what happened? He asked. Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. All the time. But not in the way I used to. I don't think about it with regret anymore. I think about it as a reminder of how far we've come. Peter smiled, reaching for her hand. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The city buzzed below them, but in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. I love you, Peter, Olivia said, her voice soft but steady. More than anything. Peter squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with emotion. I love you too, Olivia. Always and forever. Epilogue. Years later, Peter and Olivia stood on the same balcony, watching their children play in the park below. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. They'd built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and second chances. As they watched their kids chase each other around the playground, Peter slipped his hand into Olivia's, the silver bracelet glinting in the sunlight. They didn't need words to express what they were feeling. They'd been through too much, fought too hard, to need them. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered.